Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our webinar, Goals, 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 What Drives the IEP. My name is Norma Francullo, and my co-presenter is Denise Reckham. We're really happy that you guys are here with us today. Just want to get some housekeeping items out of the way so we can start our webinar on time. Please note that the handout is on the right-hand side of the screen. You can download that now. Please don't wait till the end of the webinar, because once we close the webinar, you will not have access to that handout. Please note there's a chat box that you can use to communicate with the rest of the attendees who are in this webinar. And also there is a question section on the right-hand side. You'll type in your questions there, and we will go to those at the end of the webinar and answer all of those. Please also note that the webinar is being recorded, so please refrain from personal information about yourself, your child, or your school district. The recording will be posted on our website, and our website information and contact information is on the last slide of the PowerPoint. Okay, it's 12:30, so we're going to start. We're going to start by turning off our webcam so you can just focus on the PowerPoint, and we'll be both back at the end for the Q&A portion. Okay, so goals, 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 what drives the IEP? What you'll learn from this presentation is, first we'll talk about the legal requirements of goals and objectives in the IEP. Basically, what comes out of IDEA, the Federal Education Statute. We will discuss how to identify good and bad goals. We'll give you a couple of really nice examples. And lastly, what is progress monitoring? What does that mean? So first, some background information. For those of you who have attended our March webinars, we've discussed the following items. First, we start off with evaluations, and evaluations can be performed by the child study team, or you can do a private evaluation. But from the evaluation, we get baseline data on our students, and it clearly identifies all of the needs of the student, whether it's a learning need, a behavioral need, social need. It's all in that evaluation. So good evaluations give us good IEPs and helps with writing measurable annual goals. All of that information that comes out of the evaluation goes right into the IEP in a section called the present levels of performance. And from that, we can see, where the child is starting from, and we can write really good measurable goals. And this all gives us information about what the student can do right now. And because in the end, we want the student to really reach their post-secondary goal, and just like their non-disabled peers. And then we go into describing how progress towards the annual goal will be measured and determine the schedule for reporting progress to the parent. So I'm going to just talk, the first part is I'm going to talk about all the goals, and Denise will talk about progress monitoring. So first, let's talk about what the law says. And under IDEA, it requires that in an IEP that there be a statement of measurable annual goals, including academic and functional goals. So, and there's a lot of language there. So when we talk about academic, which obviously it's math, social studies, English, science, all the core academic subjects that students take. But when we talk about functional goals, we're talking about the social, emotional well-being of a child, the behaviors, all of those things. So an IEP isn't only about academics, it's also about social, emotional, and behavioral, and there's so many other functional goals out there for a student. So a goal is defined as being a measurable statement, as the statute says, that it identifies what knowledge, what skill, what behavior a student is reasonably expected to accomplish during one school year. So some goal-based basics. So goals are the roadmap to how we get from point A to point B in a school year. And goals should state exactly what you want to accomplish. So if you as the reader don't understand the goal, or it's not making any sense, then it doesn't pass like what we call the stranger test. So if you gave the goal to your spouse or your friend, would they understand it? So we need to understand what the goal means, and it has to make sense. And we have to know how goals are measured. How will we determine whether progress has been made in a school year? Sometimes evaluations come up with a lot of goals. There can be 20, 25, 30 plus goals. So how do we prioritize the goals? And so we can have, on how we do that is we base it on a child's ability. We base it on their rate of progress, and that's, the pace in which a student learns new information. And that takes time, for a team, for a teacher to get a sense of the student's rate of progress. Like, we have to look at, sometimes we have a history of the rate of progress, sometimes we don't. It may take maybe 2 weeks, a month, a couple of months to kind of figure out the rate of progress. Goals have to be related to a service being provided to a student. So, for example, if we write a goal that, addresses peer relationships, we can't simply just write the goal. We have to support that goal. So, by supporting the student with social skills training. So the components of a good goal. So we're going to go through this before I show you some examples. So the components are really, who's the student? That's the obvious. What will they do? Like, we have to state the need. Again, that need is coming straight out of the evaluation. Third, we want to know, like, what's the level? What's the criteria that we're setting? Like, so a lot of you will look at your IEPs and it'll talk about, like, child will do it at 80% accuracy and things like that. So that's the level, that's the criteria. And how will they show mastery? How do we know that a child has mastered a goal? So sometimes you typically might see in the IEP, like, 3 out of 4 trials or 8 out of 10 trials. That's going to help us to determine whether a child has mastered a goal. If we simply write a goal, then we are going to have to assume that if we did it once, we've mastered it. That can't be possible. So that's why we need to know how we're going to master it. Under what conditions? Like, what's the setting? Is it in gym class? Is it in English class? Is it in the resource room? Where is this? Where is it? Where's the setting? Where's the situation? And what's the length of time? We can write goals that, have to be accomplished by the end of the spring semester, or by September, or within a month. How we determine what length of time really goes back to what I was saying about, what is the rate of progress. So it's not about, we say, in a year's time, how much progress will a child make. It doesn't mean that we have to wait until June to find out if they master the goal. And finally, we have to figure out, how, as a team, how will we progress? How will progress be measured, and what assessment is going to be used to measure that, and by whom? Okay, so we have a couple, about 4 or 5 goals, examples of goals, and so these are, some of them have taken straight out of IEPs, and so these are pretty real. So here we have an area of need that we've identified for a student, and it's reading comprehension. And so the bad goal looks like, when given grade level text, Mary will ask and answer questions to demonstrate understanding of the text. So when we look at this, the first thing that I see is like, what is, I have questions. So that's not a good sign. So we look at the first sentence, when given grade level text, what is meant by grade level text? The next question I have is, all right, so Mary will ask and answer questions to demonstrate understanding of the text. How do we measure, demonstrate understanding of the text? How do we do this? So let's look at what a good goal could possibly look like. So after independently reading a narrative passage at her independent reading level, level C, end of kindergarten, Mary will independently identify 5 of the 6 story elements: main idea, main characters, story setting, 3 key details from the story for 4 consecutive bi-weekly, every other week, probes with 80% accuracy. So there's a big difference between the first goal and now the new goal. And what we see is that the goal is clearly laid out. So we have great baseline data. So we know that the child is currently reading at a level C, and this is imaginary, level C, end of kindergarten. And we want the goal to say that, you know, they will, after independently reading a narrative passage, not just a grade level text, but a narrative passage, that they will independently do X, Y, and Z. And we have the criteria. We have the 80% accuracy. We know how we're going to show mastery, you know, after 4 consecutive bi-weekly probes. So this is a nice, meaty goal. And it gives you a lot of information, a lot of things to measure, and that's what we want to see. Second goal here, students having difficulty remaining in his seat in class. So the bad goal is John will learn to sit still in class. So this is, you're getting this. This doesn't really tell us anything. So he's got to learn how to do it, but how does he do it? Where, when, how, and how are we going to measure this? So the good goal is going to add all those components in. So we have John will remain seated during circle time for 15 minutes with 80% accuracy in 5 consecutive trials, as charted by his teacher. So John's evaluation revealed that when the observer observed him in class, that he was really having a lot of difficulty in circle time. So why not write a goal about that? So John will remain seated during circle time and for 15 minutes. So we've got, you know, we have the mastery, the trials, we've got the criteria, 80%, and we know how we're going to collect data. We're going to chart it, and we know who's going to do that, the teacher. Next goal, Mary has difficulty with organization, and we see this a lot, and the goal here is, the bad goal is, Mary will keep her assignment notebook organized. Again, doesn't tell me anything, but now the good goal shows that Mary is going to maintain an assignment book to record short-term, long-term homework assignments with minimal verbal prompts, 80% of the time, 8 out of 10 trials, as charted by her personal aide. So here there's a lot more information. We know about mastery. The goal is more defined. We know who's going to chart and how we're going to collect data. This is a good goal. Now here, this goal, we're talking about poor reading fluency. So the bad goal is Mary will improve her reading fluency. Again, doesn't tell us anything. The good goal shows, given 2nd grade level passage, Mary will read orally at 100 words, correct words per minute, with 80% accuracy in 5 consecutive trials, using a 1-minute oral reading probe by the end of the fall semester, and 117 correct words per minute by the end of the spring semester. And the teacher is going to use running records. So here we have a lot more information that, Mary is going to be given like 2nd grade level passage, that she's going to read it orally, not to herself. She's going to read it orally. That's how we're going to test her, her ability to read words per minute. Right now, we know that 100 words is what her baseline data is. We know that she's going to do it at 80% accuracy, and that she's going to have 5 consecutive trials, and the reading probe is going to be a minute. That she is going to increase her correct words per minute up to 117 by the end of the spring semester. And we know now that the teacher is going to use running records as a way of collecting data to show whether progress has been made. Okay, this final goal is from, again, an IEP that we had sample, and we're using this because you'll see that, depending on what district you're in and what your district software, IEP software, things are going to look a little different in how everything is laid out. But again, if you go to the slide that talks about the good, what is a good, all the components of a good goal, that's what you're really after. And so this will show you, and you'll see what I mean. So students need to improve pro-social behaviors. Just an FYI, pro-social behaviors really talk about helping a student, ability of a student to share, to help, to show acts of kindness, to work with others, to reach a goal. So that's a pro-social behavior. So here, bad goal. Sally will improve pro-social behaviors. A good goal is Sally will be able to exhibit pro-social behaviors with 80% accuracy as measured by varied assessments. So you might be questioning right now, well, varied assessments doesn't seem very clear, but the IEP team went on further, and I'll show you the next slide, to provide 2 objectives within this one goal. And so first objective was Sally will be able to play independently and cooperatively in pairs and social groups. And they lay out very clearly what the evaluation procedure is going to be and what's the criteria for mastery. Again, the other objective, Sally will be able to take turns. Again, the evaluation procedures are clearly laid out and criteria for mastery. So the format looks a little different, but it still has all of the components that you want to see in a good goal. Okay, Denise, it's your turn.
Okay, so I'm going to jump in on progress monitoring. So what is progress monitoring? So we have these goals and objectives, and we have to know if the child is making meaningful progress towards meeting those goals. Progress monitoring is the data that's collected and analyzed to determine the student's progress. It's a way for the teacher, the case manager, the related service provider, and the parent to evaluate the effectiveness of the instruction that the child is receiving in their program. Next slide. So what does the Individuals with Disabilities in Education Act say about progress monitoring? The IDEA states that each child's IEP must contain a description of how the child's progress towards meeting the annual goals described in the goals and objectives will be measured, and when periodic reports on the progress of the child is making towards those goals and objectives will be provided. Next slide. Similarly, in the New Jersey regulation, it states that the IEP must contain a statement of how the student's progress towards the annual goals will be measured, and a statement of how the student's parents will be regularly informed of their student's progress towards the annual goals, and to the extent which the progress is sufficient to enable the student to achieve the goals by the end of the year. They shall also be informed of the progress of their child at least as often as the parents of non-disabled children are informed of their child's progress. So generally you'll see that when the report cards come out, the general education report cards, that's when the progress reports will come out as well. Next slide. So, how will the progress be measured? This is, it's kind of a big topic because it really depends on what the goal is. There isn't one answer here. If it's a reading program, like Wilson, for instance, Wilson comes with assessments embedded into the program, the weight assessment. So, that is an internal program-based assessment, whereas you can also have curriculum-based measurements. That's where you see DRAs. All the kids are usually taking the DRAs. It's not just kids necessarily with a reading disability. And so that's a progress measurement that can be useful in assessing progress. I guess the thing you'd want to be cautioned about is whether or not the assessment that they're using is actually the right assessment to see if the child's making progress toward the goal. Because if it's not, then you're not getting accurate information, and you're not able to really assess if the goals and objectives are truly being met. Here on the list, we have observation checklists. There's reviewing classwork. There may be writing goals for writing a five-paragraph essay, things like that. You'd be reviewing the actual classwork, homework assignments. There's always anecdotal records that are brought to bear, and the teachers generally, use that as well when they're making their present levels for the IEP. There's quizzes, tests, teacher-made assessments, informal and formal assessments. And then when we're talking about autism program, there's a whole other set of ABA data that must really, if they're not taking data and they're saying it's an ABA program, it's not an ABA program. Because to be an ABA program, they have to have data, and there has to be a behaviorist looking at the data and graphing the data and seeing whether the child is making meaningful progress. There are requirements that the behaviorists watch the person who's taking the data to make sure they're taking the data accurately. It's a very, very important process, because without the progress monitoring, you can't know whether or not the goals are being met, or whether things should be changed. Next slide. Sharing the data with the parents. So how often should the data be collected and shared with the parents? That also really depends on the goal. If we're talking about a behavioral goal, for instance, that's really being worked on, it may be that the parents should be told daily whether or not certain behaviors were evident in the classroom. The parents need to be able to be working with the child at home, and they need to know what's happening on a daily basis in certain instances, so that they can work with the child at home and carry over what's happening at the school. Other times weekly, other times monthly or bi-monthly, and sometimes it's just at the progress reports that the parents are getting the progress reports with the report cards, as I said before. You don't want to wait too long to share the data, because if things are not working well for the child, things need to be changed. And the data is really what should inform the decisions about the instruction for the child. The goals do not have to stay the same for the entire year. The instruction does not have to stay the same for the entire year. It can be changed. So if the data indicates that the child is just not grasping the program or not making progress, then there should be a meeting, and either, looking to change the goals, or looking to change the program, or trying, or maybe doing another assessment, trying to figure out what's going on and why the child is not making the meaningful progress that was expected when the IEP was written. Next page. So in summary, on for goals, in a nutshell, you want the goal to say that the student will do something, whatever it is that we're looking to work on, how they'll do it and over what period of time, how we'll measure the progress, and it needs to be a way that makes sense given the goal in the program, and how often we're going to check in, and when we're going to share the data with the parents and with the team. Next page. So why does all this matter? And this is really the crux of it, because, the IEP is, as we've said in other webinars, is the roadmap to this individual child's education. Okay, we have the general ed curriculum, and that is part of what the child needs to learn. And then we have the IEP, which has been developed based on the child's individualized needs. So appropriate goals, which are based on these demonstrated areas of need, which we've found out from the evaluations. And those goals are connected to the services that are required to meet the goals. So, you can't just put a goal, John will hand in his homework, into the IEP and not provide any kind of service to teach John how to be organized enough to hand in his homework. Otherwise, how can that be a reasonable goal? How can we think that John is going to be able to do it? Why is he going to be able to all of a sudden hand in his homework if that's an area of need, if that's something he's been unable to do? So we've included it in the IEP. Why would he be able to do it when he's never been able to do it before if we're not providing him any kind of educational service that teaches him how to do it? So every goal that you have should be connected to a service that is how the child's going to learn how to do whatever it is they need to do to meet that goal. And that's the foundation of the IEP. If that's working right, if we've taken the time and the effort to really evaluate the child's needs properly, and if we've then taken that information and we've developed appropriate goals and objectives to target those areas of need, if we have then provided the child with the services that they require to make progress towards meeting those goals, then that should be an appropriate IEP. That should be free appropriate public education, or FAPE. Now, it doesn't mean that it's, there are well-meaning people who can put together a program and it just doesn't work. They thought it would work. Everyone thought it would work. It's not working. That's why you look at the progress reporting. That's why you see if the progress is being made, and you modify the services or supports or how things are being delivered in reaction to the progress reporting that you're receiving in order for the child to make progress. Next slide. So again, if progress is not being made, right? So the program replacement needs to be reevaluated. The goals may need to be amended. There are legal issues about a denial of free appropriate public education. I would caution to say that just because the plan isn't working doesn't mean it's a violation of FAPE. If the team is being responsive to the data that the plan's not working and making changes and trying to other things to get the plan to work. When you get into legal issues and denial of FAPE issues, it's really that, either the goals and objectives weren't the right ones or measurable, didn't target the areas of need. The data wasn't being taken and it wasn't being monitored, or the data was being taken and monitored and no changes were being made in response to the child failing to make progress. And the same thing was going over and over and over again, even though the child was not making progress. Again, the data is really what needs to drive it. There has to be data. I mean, some of the things we see also are that there's no data. Again, if it's an ABA program and there's no data, it's not an ABA program, because you have to have data. You have to be taking data in order for it to be a true ABA program. Discrete trials in ABA programming where what you think of as where the child is sitting one-on-one or one-on-two with a service provider, and they're going over this skill. That is part of a method of teaching that's involved in ABA teaching. But ABA teaching for children with autism requires not just the taking of data, but the accurate taking of data and the review of the data by someone who's qualified to review the data, and progress, very actually significant progress monitoring to make sure there's progress, and then changing things constantly in the program to keep the child moving ahead. And if the child's not making progress, they need to try something different. So you want to make sure that the right data is being taken, and that once it's taken, it's actually being reviewed and looked at, and so that you can make sure that the goals are being met. So I think that those are all the slides we have. We can turn over now to questions. And let's say, does anybody have any questions? Yeah, we do have questions. Hold on. Okay, I'll come back on to. Hi.
Okay.
Okay, so the first question, are there any laws that govern how data is taken? I requested raw data, and they state that they don't do that. They do reports, tests, quizzes, etc. So again, there isn't like necessarily a specific law that says what data has to be taken, but there is the requirements that we went over before, saying the data has to be taken. And like I mentioned, if we're talking about autism and they're not taking data, they're saying they're giving an ABA program, they're not giving an ABA program because there has to be data. You are entitled to review the information that relates to your child. So while there are some test protocols that they don't have to provide copies of to you, they should allow you to come in and look at any information that is from your child's file. That's your right as their parent. They're not supposed to keep that from you. This is the next question. To add, my son has autism, but isn't in an autism program. Can I still request actual data taken related to goals? Sure. Yes, you should request that, and that would really be best practice. I mean, they can't know if the child, with certain types of skills for kids with autism especially, if they're not taking data, they can't really know whether the child's making progress, and they can't really know also when the child's doing these behaviors, why they're doing the behaviors. You might want to request a functional behavior assessment if that has not been done, to really figure out what's going on and when the behaviors are happening and why, so that you make sure that the goals and objectives and the services that you're getting are appropriate.
Does the school have the right to terminate IEP claiming the child is doing well, therefore no longer needs special services? The school district can't just terminate special services. They need to task the student to make sure that they've reached their goals, that they are right in a line with their peers. So we can't just say well, Johnny is doing great, so we're terminating services. You have to go a step further and test the student.
I like to also add on that sometimes, with the right services and supports, the student may not require special education anymore, direct instruction in whatever it was they were getting instruction in that gave them the IEP. But that doesn't mean they don't still need support. For instance, let's take a child with dyslexia whose reading has been remediated. They may still read very slowly. They may still need extra time. They may still need assistance. That would be more of a 504 need because that's an accommodation or modification, something that levels the playing field as opposed to an IEP, which is direct services. If the child does not need direct services, they really should have a 504 plan.
Yeah, I mean, the whole idea of special education is that, it's all about early intervention, trying to get the most services for the child and to slowly weed out. I mean, it's nice to see when the special education actually works when you see a child early on in elementary school getting all the services that they need, slowly in middle school, like kind of taking away as they make their goals, and then eventually in high school they're left with, let's say, a 504, simply with accommodations, because that only helps them as when they get into the real world or whatever post-secondary experience that they're going for, whether it's work or college or vocational. You need to be able to, function, in the real world. You have to function in the classroom and you have to function in the real world. So that's kind of like how services kind of should be working. Is there a website or other reference materials you can recommend with sample goals? They actually are, like when you do Google, for what's a good goal, what's a bad goal, you'll find a lot of different PowerPoints out there. There's different guidebooks. There are a lot of things. I honestly don't have one in particular, but I don't know, Denise, do you have anything? There is a lot.
Yeah, not in particular. I mean, there really there are a lot of resources from organizations, especially sometimes if you put in autism or ADHD or into the Google search, it'll come up with an organization like CHAD, say, is an ADHD organization that has resources specifically targeted for those disabilities, and sample goals, but again, like, it really should be driven from the child's assessments. So they should be, and you can ask, first of all, if you're getting private assessments, ask the evaluator to recommend goals and objectives, reasonable, meaningful, measurable goals and objectives to meet the child's needs. And that's what the team is supposed to do. They're supposed to sit and craft the goals based on the needs. I think the most important thing is when you're doing that with the team is to be asking them if you see will improve something. And that to me is completely meaningless. Everybody improves in things just by breathing and living. You improve basically, and you may improve not that much, but you can improve. But asking it to be more defined, is reading at this level now? Well, if we do this program, what do we think that he or she is going to be reading at what level by the end of the year? What's a reasonable rate for a year for this child? The other thing is, it also depends on how far behind the child is. If you're 3 or 4 years behind, it's not enough to just read, get 1 year of growth in 1 year, because then you're always going to be 3 or 4 years behind. So I think it's not so much having a list of goals and objectives, but really looking at the needs and trying to craft something that you understand, they understand, everybody understands what's going to be targeted, what the services, what's going to be learned, and what information is going to be needed to see that the child is growing and getting towards that goal, and it's clearly defined. And then everybody's on the same page. This is just, I think, part of the one from before.
Yeah.
Okay, can an IEP be denied if the child has a 504? It's not that it can be denied because the child has the 504. The child is entitled to an IEP if they have a disability that is listed in the statute, which, then there's this other health impaired. There's sort of gray areas in the statute, but they have a disability listed in the statute. The disability impacts their ability to learn, okay, and that they need special education. So you have a child with a 504, let's say, who has ADHD, okay? Because some kids with ADHD have a 504 plan, some kids have an IEP. So some kids with ADHD, if you give them extra time, if you put them in the front of the room, if you give them maybe guided notes to keep themselves organized, if you give them accommodations, that's all they really need. Okay, the other kids with ADHD, they have significant social emotional struggles that need direct services. They need to be taught how to do something that's related, a deficit because of the ADHD. So the child that needs the instruction, and that can be social emotional instruction, it could be meeting with the guidance counselor to learn how to have more tolerance to frustration. It could be meeting with social skills class to learn how to behave or react with other children in a group, or be patient or take turns. These are all skills that require instruction. That's an IEP. The child who just needs time and just needs, space, or needs to be able to take a walk around maybe that child can manage their anxiety or their frustration or their needs, but they just need a little space to do so, or they need to be able to take a break. That child maybe just needs a 504 in order to be, to be given the equal opportunity to benefit from their instruction.
Next question. If my child meets their goals, is that enough to discharge them from a service such as PT, or do we need to get an evaluation to agree to the discharge? Again, similar question from before. You can't simply discharge a student once they've met their goals. You need to do an evaluation. But I think we also have to, when we say we're meeting the goals, are those the only goals? Were there like 20? Were there additional goals that we needed to meet? Did he just meet some of the goals? Are there other goals? It's a question to ask the child study team or your teacher. Are you seeing other things? We can always create another goal. I don't know. So it's not just meeting what's in the IEP, the goals that are listed. Maybe there are additional goals that need to be met that we could add.
So she asked also if where that is in the law. I don't know that offhand. We can certainly get back to you with a citation, but as a general rule, they should test the student before, do an evaluation before discharging. Otherwise, we don't know if the student. It's like, I guess it's the same as when you first come into special ed, you're doing an evaluation to see what the child's needs are. So they should be doing an evaluation to see if the child still needs special education. They're not supposed to just say they met their yearly goals, because your yearly goals, what you can accomplish in 1 year from the IEP, is not necessarily all of the need, because sometimes there's so much need, you can't you can't focus on everything at the same time. You have to pick the most important things and focus on that first, and then you can come back to the next things.
Mm-hmm. Are the webinars recorded somewhere? I would like to ask. Yes, the webinars are recorded and they will be posted. Our past webinars are all on our website. Today's webinar will be posted this afternoon, so you can share it with friends, family.
Okay, so if my son was diagnosed with dyslexia after he was evaluated by the child study team, do they have to document the new diagnosis as part of the child's previous evaluation? My son was denied any special services during his evaluation, but now I have this diagnosis, and the principal is saying my son does not need an IEP, and the CST does not need to get involved. Okay, write a letter to the child study team giving them the diagnosis and the evaluation that you have, and requesting that your child be reevaluated for an IEP. Okay, they should take these diagnoses and this information into account, and they should, they can reevaluate or they can use their old evaluations and just consider this new piece of information. But you have every right when your child, it's not a static thing where they did something and now you have this new information and it's too late, you missed it. It doesn't work that way. Certainly, if you have information that you did not have before, you need to go back and put in writing that you are requesting that the child be evaluated for an IEP so that they understand that that is a formal request. I do not agree with the principal.
Yeah, and based on the diagnosis that you got, I'm sure the evaluator kind of explained in detail the areas within reading that your child is finding to be a challenge. So sharing additional, information, just essays that they've written, tests, any samples of writing, even I even had a parent who recorded their child reading and presented that to the team. So you also have data, and your data, your observations that you're making on a daily basis at home, and what your child's bringing home and sharing with you through tests and research papers and things like that, even as much as like going into their, this sounds silly, but going into their wastebasket and pulling out all the drafts that they wrote. You can find lots and lots of things, information, that's data there, and share that with the team. So.
Okay, so the next question is, for a reading goal, should it include a defined level as a goal for that year? I would say yes, absolutely. I mean, you want to understand if your child is reading, it depends on what assessments they're using, but let's say they're reading at a level C, and in general, for a child at that grade should be reading at a level E. You want to understand, where they're saying they're going to give you pull-out reading in the resource room. They're going to give you one-on-one instruction. I mean, first of all, you want to understand what program they're using. If that program that they're using has internal assessments that you want, to understand within the program, how much progress should the child be expected to make, and where does that leave the child vis-a-vis the general education curriculum and their peers, even if they do make the progress that they're expecting. And then, yes, you want to know if everything goes right, if the child progresses as they should in the program, what level should be expected at the end of the year. Absolutely, I think that's when the goals are the best, because everybody understands what that means, and either the child is or isn't meeting the goal. And then the next question is, for math, I am told that my son is covering the same curriculum in his resource class as the gen ed students. Is that true? It depends on the school. Resource generally means yes. Resource room generally means that's general education curriculum, but being taught in a different way, which is different than replacement. When they use the word replacement, it generally means that it's not the same, that they're replacing the general ed curriculum with something else. But I think what you need to do is look at the goals and objectives and see if the goals and objectives are aligning with end year. Let's say your child's in third grade, and the goals and objectives are aligning with end third grade math skills that the other kids in the general education are getting, then yes, then this is just a smaller environment with more individualized attention, teaching the same curriculum. It's a very important question to ask, because if the child is being pulled, say, into the resource room because they have attentional issues or they need more individualized instruction, you definitely want to know if things change and the child's attentional things resolve and they're able to be in the general education, are they going to be with their peers at the same level of instruction, or is moving into this other class actually in some way going to disadvantage them and pull them even further away from their peers? Those are all questions you need to ask. You know,
And it's simply like even just checking in to see, like, there's so much on the school's website and teacher websites, and they're showing, we're going over chapter blah, 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 and this chapter, that chapter, so you can compare, contrast, looking at, what textbook they're using, what their tests are like. Of course, sometimes there are modifications to a test, but the content is what is the same. So those are other ways of looking to see.
Right. And you can also ask, I would ask the question, okay, it's the same curriculum, but is my child only going to, let's say the general ed is going from chapter 1 through 10 in the whole year, right? Is my child only going through 1 through 5? Or is my child also going through 1 through 10, but just being taught in a different way? These are all questions you need to ask, because I think sometimes the parents and the school are talking past each other. The school is saying something. They think what they're saying is understandable from the parent side, but it's not always understandable. Yes, it's the same curriculum, but then I found out that my kid only did 1 through 5, everyone else did 1 through 10. And so my kid did the same curriculum of what they did, they just only did half of it. So you want to really kind of delve into and ask deeper questions about what is being taught in that classroom versus in the general education math classroom. And, just because a child may have attentional difficulties and may benefit from a small environment, if they're strong in math and if it isn't exactly the same curriculum taught in a different or smaller environment, maybe they stay in the general education room with an aide or some other way to help them be able to be in that other class. So those are all questions that you definitely want to ask when you're making these decisions. So I think that's all our questions.
Yes. I mean,
So thank you all for joining us.